In mixed martial arts, if you have a world title, you are at the top of the heap. You're getting the most promotion, you're getting the most opportunity. Everyone's eyes are on you. But that doesn't always mean you need a world title to be a popular fighter. In fact, there are quite a few fighters over the years who have become massive stars in the MMA world without ever having touched that sweet, sweet gold. And today, we're going to take a look at the 10 fighters who are so compelling, so interesting, and so awesome at what they do that fans don't care who they're fighting or what they're fighting for, so long as they're on the card. I'm Tommy from MMA On Point, and these are the 10 most popular non-champions ever. A quick note, we are not counting tournament wins as world title victories because that's not what they are. We are strictly referring to divisional title holders in major MMA promotions. On to the list. Number 10, Jason Miller. Jason Miller might be more known now for his litany of legal issues and a notorious appearance on the MMA Hour.
Yo, okay. You know what? You guys fucking have your fucking stupid internet radio show in your mom's basement.
But there was a time that Mayhem was one of the most popular and visible fighters in mixed martial arts. The middleweight bumped around the regional scene for most of his early career, earning notable wins over Tim Kennedy and Robbie Lawler. He even fought GSP in a one-fight stint in the UFC in 2005. But Miller's rise to superstardom came from his work as the host of the MTV series Bully Beatdown, a show that pitted bullies against pro fighters like Jake Shields and Eddie Alvarez from 2009 to 2012. The show's mainstream popularity made Mayhem one of MMA's most notable figures at the time, and given his ability to entertain as well as be an excellent interview, fans just loved Jason Miller.
Letting Ryan punch me in the face was kind of like sticking your head out of a car window. Annoying? Yeah. Painful? Not really.
During that period, he would make his mark in the MMA world by competing for titles in both Dream and Strikeforce, as well as instigating the infamous Strikeforce brawl on national television. Even though he always came up short on gold, Miller's star was so bright when he re-entered the UFC in 2011, he did so as a coach of The Ultimate Fighter opposite Michael Bisping. And of course, he played Lucky Patrick in the Kevin James comedy Here Comes the Boom that next year. Fans who jumped on board during the Rousey or McGregor eras may not know much about Mayhem today, but during the run of his hit television series, Miller was one of MMA's most popular figures. Number 9, Tank Abbott. If you were to ask someone what a street fighter looks like, they would probably draw up something like Tank Abbott. A big mean sumbitch who looks like he just finished his beer at the bar and is looking to knock someone's head off. Abbott's favorite pastime was beating the shit out of people, so once the UFC caught wind of this brawler who looks straight out of an action movie, they threw him into the mix at UFC 6, and he became an instant fan favorite with his heavy hands and 17-minute battle with Oleg Taktarov in the tournament final. From there, Tank would be a mainstay in the UFC through 1998, where he remained ultra popular, even being asked to headline UFC 15 last minute for the world title against Maurice Smith on just a few days' notice. Tank would come up short, but he did drop Smith early in the fight. During that period of time, Abbott's persona and image were to the mainstream public what a cage fighter was. For better or worse, he appeared on Friends. He was briefly in WCW, where he just played himself and was immediately placed in their title picture. He was so popular, the UFC brought him back for a brief and disastrous 3-fight stint in the early 2000s. When Elite XC needed a monster for Kimbo Slice to slay in 2008, they called on Tank Abbott. The event's subtitle, Street Certified. Abbott very much was the Kimbo Slice of the 90s, and that badass street fighting persona made him one of the sport's earliest stars here in the United States, even if he never held a single title in his career. Number 8, Mark Hunt. There are so many things about Mark Hunt that have endeared him to MMA fans over the years. There is, of course, his 10 devastating KO victories and fan-friendly fighting style, his legendary chin, his willingness to throw down with anyone. He's literally fought nearly all of the best heavyweights in MMA history. The fact that he just kind of looks like a guy you might know or be, but he's a killer. The walk-off KOs, his nonchalant demeanor, unless, of course, he's cursing out cheaters and the UFC, which fans love too.
I'm glad that Fabricio Werdum got caught, the little bitch, go back to the favelas. Fuck you, you little cunt.
Mark Hunt can do no wrong, and he's one of those beloved fighters that fans will probably buy beers for at any bar in the world for the rest of his life. He doesn't say much, but his blood and guts style has made him an all-time favorite since his days in Pride all the way through to the UFC. After losing 6 straight, Hunt went on a 4-fight run in the UFC that had fans losing their minds over the idea of Hunto in a title fight. Hashtag rally for Mark Hunt. Sadly, he would lose in a brutal bout with Junior Dos Santos before earning that shot, but would get his chance in 2014 for the interim title, coming up short again, this time to Fabricio Werdum. It doesn't matter though. No number of wins or losses could ever change how fans feel about the Super Samoan. His legacy as one of the most badass and fan-favorite fighters to ever step into the cage has long been cemented. Number 7. Mirko Cro Cop. Right leg hospital, left leg cemetery. If there's a more badass thing that's been said in human history, I haven't heard it. And Mirko Cro Cop is the epitome of badass. Tough as nails, stoic, able to take someone's head clean off. He looks like a fucking Terminator, and he fought like one too. Deadly precision, seemingly unkillable. He served in a fucking anti-terrorist unit for 6 years. For fans who only knew Cro Cop for his UFC run starting in 2007, they really missed out on how truly terrifying and awesome this wild boy was in Pride and K1. He was beloved in Japan. The Croatian scored 29 KO TKOs in Pride and K1 in just a 5-year span. That is a whole bunch of head trauma. Cro Cop was killing everybody, and he fought the best there was to fight. He came up short of gold in Pride twice against Big Nog as well as Fedor in a legendary bout, but he did win the Openweight Grand Prix in 2006 right before heading to the UFC. He was no longer the force of nature in the US that he was in Japan, but he was still a fan favorite, and his reputation as an absolute murderer stayed with him long after his prime. But did his prime ever end? Mirko would have a late career resurgence, winning the K1 World GP in 2013 and the Ryzen Openweight GP in 2016, going on a 10-fight winning streak before being forced to retire due to a stroke. If not for his health, you got the sense that Cro Cop would just keep on knocking people unconscious for the rest of time. And if all of that hasn't sold you on his popularity, he has the votes to prove it, as he was elected to the Croatian parliament in 2003. Number 6. Kazushi Sakuraba. If this list were about how popular fighters are in Japan, Kazushi Sakuraba would be the easiest number 1 pick for any list we've ever created. He is an icon in his home country. He is a legendary presence in both the pro wrestling and MMA world. The living legend made his name in the Japanese pro wrestling scene during the 90s, and in an attempt to protect the business's legitimacy, was entered as a late substitute in the UFC Japan Ultimate Japan tournament, which he won using his catch wrestling skills, even if he really basically only had to fight one time to do so. From there, Sakuraba cemented his space in the MMA fandom by becoming the Gracie Killer, being the first from Japan to defeat a member of the family since the early 50s. Kazushi knocked off Hoyler, Henzo, Hyen, and Hoyce in what would be the UFC 1 winner's first ever MMA defeat in a legendary encounter at the Pride 2000 Grand Prix opening round, further legitimizing the Japanese style and skyrocketing Sakuraba into mythical status. Kazushi also scored wins over former UFC champions Kevin Randleman, Rampage Jackson, Vitor Belfort, and Carlos Newton, despite having a rough go of it in the latter half of his Pride run, going 7-7 over the course of a 4-year span, including a loss for the inaugural middleweight title against Vanderlei Silva, of whom he was defeated by 2 other times. Sakuraba's popularity didn't wane in the slightest. Known for his playful demeanor, there was something about him that translated universally in addition to his incredible performances in the ring, and he's been a revered figure in the sport now since the early 2000s. In Japan, whenever a promotion needs a big name for their event, Sakuraba has been called on time and time again, all the way up to 2015, despite being well past his prime. And in 2017, the UFC inducted him into the Hall of Fame's Pioneer Wing. Japan has played a major role in MMA's popularity over the years, and there is no more popular figure from the Japanese MMA scene than Kazushi Sakuraba. Number 5. Donald Cerrone. Anyone, anywhere, anytime. To describe Donald Cerrone's appeal to fans is simple. He's fucking awesome. At this point in his 50-fight career, Cerrone's willingness to throw down at the drop of a cowboy hat has given him a folklore-like status here in the United States. He's like Johnny Appleseed, except instead of planting apple trees all across the country, he's going from town to town spreading violence and earning the most knockdowns, the most finishes, the most wins, and the most post-fight bonuses in UFC history. This cowboy's quest for gold has 4 times been fruitless, but the fans couldn't care any less about that because they can't stop talking about the combo that finished Rick Story or the ass-whooping he put on Alexander Hernandez. Beer drinking, fun-loving, thrill-seeking, 1800s dressing, Cowboy Cerrone is not a gimmick. That is who this guy is every single day of the year, whether he's calling for a fight against literally anyone on the entire roster, or he's skydiving onto a jet boat that's sitting on a lake filled with fire and sharks while he's having a couple Bud Diesels. And that type of authenticity resonates with the MMA fan base, who want to be that awesome and do all those things. When it's all said and done, Cerrone's legacy will be that of an ass-kicking cowboy who fought some of the best in the world and could hang with just about anyone. And he has earned that through a lifetime of putting on fights that fans love and being one of the most unique characters in all of mixed martial arts. Number 4. Kimbo Slice. When I was a high school English teacher, a student once asked me who would win in a fight if the two fighters were the same size, George St. Pierre or Kimbo Slice. I had that student expelled immediately, but the fact that he was even asking me about Kimbo Slice's chances against one of the greatest fighters of all time is a testament to just how popular Kevin Ferguson was during his career. Kimbo became famous as the internet became more accessible and web surfers naturally started looking for videos of people beating the shit out of each other. And there was a whole bunch of videos of Slice doing exactly that. The Bahamian-born brawler quickly became an internet legend. If you didn't know anything about professional fighting, which the vast majority of people didn't, Kimbo was the baddest motherfucker on the planet, and through the internet probably had the most exposure as such. His notoriety would turn into big bucks, as right around the time he was showing up in everyone's inbox, MMA was seeing a surge in popularity in the US, and thus Kimbo Mania began. Slice was on the cover of ESPN the magazine. He was headlining events for Elite XC that were on national television. He was the biggest name in mixed martial arts in 2008, period. Despite Dana White believing Kimbo wasn't skilled enough to be in the UFC,
Kimbo sucks.
the heavyweight was a no-brainer for what would end up being one of the most popular seasons of The Ultimate Fighter. He would be let go after just 2 fights in the organization, but 7 years after the prime of his popularity, Kimbo would headline a Bellator card in 2015, which would be the highest-rated show they had ever done up to that point. His next bout in the co-main for Bellator 149 still stands as the most-watched event in the company's history. His presence, his persona, his style of fighting, and his story, Kimbo Slice was larger than life and captivating. The fact that he only ever had 8 pro fights and was nowhere near any kind of title but reached number 4 on our list shows you just how big he really was when he burst onto the scene. Number 3. Jorge Masvidal. This next entry was super necessary because at this very moment in mixed martial arts history, we're watching Jorge Masvidal's star form. And if he wins big against Nate Diaz at UFC 244, he very well could be number 1 on this list before the year is over. Jorge Masvidal has always had the pieces to be a popular fighter. Just like Kimbo, Masvidal first gained notoriety in the same viral internet street fighting circuit in Miami. He has an interesting story and background. He's always been a compelling interview, and he certainly has the ability in the cage. But from his early days in 2003 up to 2019, Jorge was somewhat popular with hardcore fans. A longtime UFC veteran with some decent wins, he fought Gil Melendez for the title in Strikeforce, losing via unanimous decision, but he was by no stretch someone fans saw as potentially breaking into million pay-per-view buy territory like he is today. So what happened? Well, first and foremost, he KO'd Darren Till in London in devastating fashion, and then afterwards, in a widely viewed ESPN interview, threw down with Leon Edwards backstage. Then on that same night, gave his second interview with ESPN, where he explained how Edwards got a 3-piece with the soda. Internet meme status had been achieved. Just like that, Cuban Jesus was on the rise, and it set up a high-profile fight with ultra-popular Ben Askren, who, after talking piles of shit to his massive fan base,
now you got the biggest money fight in the division, and you're finding all kinds of reasons to be a little bitch,
was KO'd in the coolest way possible in 5 seconds. Sprinkle in a
super necessary
post-fight interview and press conference, and a star was born. Since then, the sports world, mainly through ESPN, has had a chance to get to know just how awesome Jorge Masvidal has always been through all sorts of interviews and appearances. And now he'll be headlining one of the most anticipated shows of the year for a belt they made specifically because of the perception fans have of both him and Nate Diaz. Hop on board while you can, because this hype train is just leaving the station. Number 2. Chael Sonnen. Westland's finest, the man of the hour, too sweet to be sour. I am of course talking about Chael P. Sonnen, and the P stands for excellence. A strong amateur wrestler out of Oregon, Chael started his career as another face in the crowd. He had a brief UFC run, he came up short in the WEC for the middleweight title. Hardcore fans knew he could go, but most anyone else probably hadn't even heard of him. Cut to early 2010, and Chael's on a 3-fight run in the UFC, and primed up for a title fight at middleweight. Anderson Silva's popularity as champion was in a weird spot, as he had just put on a confusing performance at UFC 112, and Dana White was not happy.
you say
I left in the 4th round and I gave the belt to Ed and I said, you put it on him. I'm not doing it.
Then, seemingly out of nowhere, Sonnen begins a scorched earth campaign against Anderson Silva in every interview on the radio, TV, and anywhere else people would listen.
He's got a black belt under the Nogueira brothers. I think a black belt under the Nogueira brothers is saying I got a free toy in my Happy Meal. I don't really... He doesn't talk to the fans. He doesn't talk to the media. He pretends he doesn't speak English. This is the way it should be. It should be the Chael Sonnen show. I'm the one they're tuning in to see. I'm the one that's selling out the arena, not him.
Suddenly, the UFC has something to market for Silva's next title defense. Sonnen was building up this fight so much in ways that fans had never really seen before that UFC 117 ended up being the must-see event of the year. Even more so, he backed up all that talk with what would end up being one of the most memorable bouts in MMA history. He would come up short, but at that point, Sonnen was so popular, even getting suspended for a year because of a failed post-fight drug test didn't slow him down. 2 years after their first meeting, the second fight between Sonnen and Silva was even bigger, again in large part due to Sonnen's ability to captivate fans who either hated him or loved him. His next fight would be for the light heavyweight title, a division he hadn't fought in since 2005. Sonnen is one of the most influential figures in MMA history. He is the godfather of fighters like Conor and the many that will follow him. He very much paved the way for that type of promotion, that type of cleverness in selling an event. There has not been a controversy or a loss that seems to put any kind of dent in Sonnen's popularity.
They don't call you the bad guy for nothing.
As he is still to this day one of the most prominent figures in the sport through his career as a commentator. You just can't stop the bad guy. Number 1. Nate Diaz. The Diaz brothers are unquestionably two of the most popular fighters in the history of mixed martial arts, and while Nick had a dominant run as Strikeforce's welterweight champion, Nate has yet to see MMA gold. Despite that, he has overtaken his brother's popularity in recent years due to his astronomically high-profile rivalry with Conor McGregor. But we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves. When Nate Diaz won the 5th season of The Ultimate Fighter, he was on his way to becoming a big star. The mainstream exposure of the show had given fans a glimpse at Nate's intriguing personality, and had things gone better afterwards, Nate would have likely been a major star much sooner in his career than he was. But after a rough run between 2009 and 2011, Nate's mainstream popularity was waning. Hardcore fans loved the Diaz brothers. They started fights, they smoked weed openly, they came off as 100% real, they were authentic, and their death by a thousand cuts style made for a lot of exciting fights. But with several more high-profile losses on major cards, including one for the lightweight title, as well as contract issues that kept Nate from fighting for over a year, by the time the 18-10 Stockton native met Michael Johnson at UFC on Fox 17, nobody was expecting that he would headline two of the biggest cards in MMA history. But after a viral call-out of Conor McGregor, and a little luck with an event falling apart and the UFC needing a short-notice replacement, Nate Diaz would get his wish and throw down with MMA's biggest star at UFC 196. The lead-up to the bout gave Nate and his unique style that hardcore fans had loved for so long massive exposure.
Who gives a Is the Money Channel?
By the time the fight actually happened, the buzz surrounding it was enormous, and Nate blew the roof off the place when he won in a stunning upset. Since then, it's been all gravy, as they say. The rematch did even bigger numbers. Nate's done talk shows like Extra and Conan O'Brien. His loss and being gone for 3 years after the second bout with Conor didn't hurt his popularity in the slightest. His comeback win against Anthony Pettis immediately shot him into the forefront of the business yet again because he is just so damn popular with the fans. And now we have the BMF title being created and on the line at UFC 244. Nate Diaz has proven he is a needle mover.
He's a needle mover now.
And doesn't need Conor to very likely sell over 1 million pay-per-views. He just needed an opponent who is as exciting and as real as he is, which is why, in large part, both Diaz and Masvidal find themselves high on our list. Huge shout out to the pride of the West Midlands, Tom Moore, for putting his editing sorcery to work on this video. Follow him on Twitter at TomMJMoore. Thanks for watching. Please give us a like and subscribe. We've got 3 new videos or more for you every single week. Let us know what you thought of the video in the comments below. Follow On Point MMA on Twitter, and have yourself a wonderful day.